Hello everybody, it's Merlin here, and I'm here to bring you a video today, obviously. Today I'm going to be talking about sort of a retrospective review discussion on Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, I've decided that to get these requested videos out of the way that haven't been put to the Patreon, I'm going to try to get them directly on the channel, probably in a format similar to this, just to be a little more laid back and not have to direct you guys directly to the site, make it a little bit easier. So, hopefully you guys like that. But this is one that I'm really excited about because to be completely honest, I love Avatar: The Last Airbender. I mean, it's honestly one of my favorite television shows of all time. Certainly one of the best animated shows ever created, especially outside of Japan. I rank it up there, honestly, with some of my favorite superhero shows, like anything the DCAU's created. It was actually the same team, a lot of the people on the same team that helped contribute to it, so there you go. But Avatar is just fantastic. Now, kind of a funny story about it. It's interesting that as much as I've come to love Avatar, I discovered it, I guess probably like back in 2008, 2009 for the first time, maybe 2010, a couple of years ago. So I actually got into it a little bit late. It was on television when I was in high school, and the funny thing was I heard that it was pretty popular, and I decided to check it out, and I saw an episode, and I kind of thought that it was just sort of a Naruto ripoff. Obviously, I wasn't impressed by the episode that I saw, which ironically is considered to be by many the worst episode of the show, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So yeah, right, 2005, 06, tried to watch it, even though I heard a lot of people liked it, couldn't get into it. A couple years later, I think my girlfriend at the time let me borrow the first season on DVD, and I really, really liked it. And then about a year or two later, I decided to get into it again and absolutely fell in love with it. I was hooked. Couldn't wait for the next episode. And I basically marathoned the whole show on Netflix within a couple weeks or something. And for those of you that don't know, Avatar basically follows this sort of, I'd say, kind of a I don't want to say medieval, probably like early industrial age society that is modeled after our Earth, probably mostly focused on, I guess, versions of Asia, India, kind of an alternate version of that. And in this world, there are specialized people who can manipulate the elements. And of course, there's the four basic elements. You've got fire, wind, earth, and water. And there's a legend that there will be this avatar who can control all the elements and use them to unite the people and defeat the Fire Nation, who has basically come over and taken over the entire world, and it's basically a dark time, essentially. And we're introduced to Aang, who's an airbender, who is supposedly the avatar, and his friends Katara, Sokka, and eventually Toth. And there's also Prince Zuko, who's the son of the Fire Lord, who was banished and is going after Aang and wants to catch him to reveal his destiny. And you've got, of course, Appa, Momo, and Iroh, a bunch of other characters as well. It's interesting that I started off kind of disliking Avatar and quickly fell in love with it once I really went into it again. So I thought I'd just kind of go piece by piece and talk about it overall. Really, if I had to pick my favorite of the 3 seasons, it's actually pretty tough because I think the whole show is pretty good. The first season works really well as an introduction and is pretty solid, and towards the end it does get very good. But I feel like seasons 2 and 3 are just fantastic. I mean, it's basically one big season. Just once they get to the Earth Kingdom and deal with all the politics there, it's very sophisticated for a kid's show, but it's something that I think the whole family can enjoy. There's something there. And it's quite obvious that this is heavily influenced by Japanese animation. Obviously, the animation style with the big eyes of the characters, also their tendency to get really cartoony and elements where they're comedic or more exaggerated. The speed lines in the background. Obviously, some of the tropes about how the characters overact at times, and the building of strength and the martial arts choreography and the various themes seem kind of Asian in nature. So yeah, there's often been a big debate about whether or not Avatar is anime. I'm going to just settle that right now. If you go by the technical definition of anime, that means Japanese animation as an animation that came directly from Japan, then it is not technically Japanese animation. Now, I do believe that some Koreans possibly worked on it, so it's close, but it's not technically Japanese animation, though it is obviously heavily influenced by it. So there you go. But I think it's really a great fusing of Western and Eastern ideas. It's basically one big love letter to anime in a lot of ways, but it's very much its own show, and in all honesty, I think it transcends a lot of series I've seen directly from Japan. I really do like the animation specifically on that point. I think it's fairly simplistic, but it's utilized very well. It's very beautiful in terms of the color. I think the voice acting is superb. I think the writing for the plot covers a lot of ground. A lot of different plots are explored, and it can be episodic at times, but for the most part, it is a pretty unified story. There isn't too much filler there, and even most of the filler is somewhat entertaining, and usually adds to the characterization somewhat. And I think that, thematically speaking, the series does touch on a lot of ideas. I think that man's relation to nature, and basically the political struggles people often come across, the concept of war, the concept of destiny, and our responsibility to our family legacies and our people's legacies, and young people shouldering responsibility. There's also some romance there, the power of friendship, a lot of high spiritualism and philosophical concepts about letting go, existentialism, separating yourself from material needs to transcend to some higher form of being. Pretty intense stuff, but I think it's presented in a way that most people can grasp the basic idea of it. It's kind of like Star Wars in that sense, I suppose. But let's get into my favorite part, which I think is what you guys might be most curious about, the characters. We'll start with Aang. Aang is obviously the Airbender, and he is the Avatar, and he's a pretty cool character. I feel like he's also modeled heavily after a lot of shonen characters where he's upbeat and happy, but he's got a strong sense of duty, and he loves his friends, and he's, riled up when things get tough and when his friends are threatened, and that's really what gets him in gear to focus on things. I think his development's great because he doesn't start off being completely all-powerful. We see him as talented, but he struggles a lot with mastering the different techniques, and through that, not just learning the skills and the techniques specifically, he has to learn about different people and how it all works, essentially. How all these different intricacies show that the world's not this simple place, that it's very complicated, and that he has to utilize the Fire Nation's ability as well. So I really like Aang. I think he's a lovable character. I think he's one of my favorite characters in the show, if not my favorite. He's definitely up there. One of the things about Avatar is the characters are so great, and I would argue that really, if there was one particular aspect, I feel that Avatar is kind of unified in all its parts, which is what makes it such a really good quality show. There's really not too much inherently wrong with it. All the different aspects of the story complement each other well, which is obviously evident of a lot of hard work and effort put into the series. But the characters are really excellent, and Aang is a great center for the series. And then there's Katara. Katara is, I think, a really great female character. Definitely, much like Aang, she has some doubts about her place and struggling to master certain things, and she has to let go of her vengeance. She actually has one of my favorite episodes is where she meets the one waterbender who talks about bloodbending, which was some of the most disturbing stuff ever, and she really proves she can master quite a bit there and has a lot of challenges. And I think her romance with Aang's pretty good too. There's some good tension there, but I feel like it's well developed for the most part, and I'm sure there's all kinds of shipping discussions about that. But Katara is a great character. Then there's her brother Sokka, who is basically the one major character who doesn't have any bending abilities, really. And he's kind of the comedic relief, of course, but he develops his own right, I think, eventually as a sword fighter. And he's a really great character as well, always there to pitch in with some sarcastic comments, but often words of wisdom. I think he's kind of the person to keep things grounded when Aang or Katara go off the deep end. I feel like he brings everybody back a lot of the time. So he functions very well as a good character too. I always really liked him. I think his humor is enough to justify his existence, and I think that this is a character that sometimes gets hate because they say he's pointless, maybe, but they prove within the series that he has a lot of worth, even though it might not seem like he's got the superpowers to go with it. Then there's Toth. Toth is the earthbender who's blind, and she's, kind of a fire starter, I guess you could say. A strong attitude, very, very closed off from people, kind of grumpy, definitely defensive despite her great power. She's a really awesome bender for sure, and she's definitely my favorite of the main characters. I absolutely love her, and I think I'm not even entirely sure why it is, to be honest. Like, I think, is she as well written as the other three characters? I don't know, but she's just so likable. She's so literally grounded, and she seems like she's this person who should be more vulnerable, but she manages to bounce back despite her blindness and is very useful to the team. and I find her incredibly hilarious a lot of the time. She's got that perfect blend, I guess, of badassery and comedy to make her a really likable character that I always want to see. I've always liked Toth a lot. I thought she was really cool. Then you've got Prince Zuko. You know, I typically don't like the dark, brooding character that's kind of a whiny emo guy with a tragic past, but this is one of those rare instances where a lot of his angst is very much justified. The guy is built up to be the prince of this nation, but he's basically, he's mutilated by his father and then exiled and basically put in this really hard position of being forced to do something he doesn't necessarily want to do, which is why his hate is primarily focused on Aang, because he's not really angry about it. He's got a lot of self-doubt. And I find one of the consistent themes with a lot of the characters in Avatar is they all seem to have some kind of self-doubt about their identity and their place in the world. And the series often is about them trying to find a way to reconcile that and to find balance there. And Zuko, I think, is one of the most obvious examples because he goes through so much. And another one of the great themes that the series explores is kind of overcoming mistrust and racial tensions, political tensions, and forgiveness. And I think with Zuko, Katara, there's a lot of that as well, because they grow to hate and fear each other, but over time, their alliance fuses. And oftentimes with a darker character with that kind of background, they are generally more complicated, which is why, since they toe the line of villainy, a lot of people find those characters interesting. And of course, he's so dreamy for a lot of the female audience members, I'm sure. So Zuko is, of course, a very popular character, and he's voiced by Dante Bosco, who has always been awesome, Rufio! Hook reference there. But yeah, Zuko is probably the best developed character out of all of them, to be completely honest, because he has the longest struggle to go through. But he is pretty likable despite that. He can get annoying at times, I'm not going to lie. He can get annoying. But overall, though, I think he was pretty well developed. Now, my favorite supporting character outside of the main group is definitely Iroh, and that's Zuko's uncle. He always has these really, really calming, thought-provoking, enlightening things to say, and he's really, I love those mentor figures. They're some of my favorite characters. Those older, wise men that are guiding the heroes through their journey, and they have so much knowledge, and as people are freaking out, they're like, it'll be fine, because it's funny, young generations never want to listen to the older ones, but the previous generations have a lot to say because they've been through it already. You have to wonder what it would be like if we really did listen to some of the wisdom of previous generations. But Iroh is just awesome, and he's also got enough comedy, but he's got the strong sense of honor, which I really admire, and he's perceived as, obviously being more pacifistic, which he is, and he doesn't seem like he'd be an adept fighter, but Iroh is pretty great. And my favorite moment for him, my favorite moment for Iroh was when he gets imprisoned, and he just starts training. Like, you know what? I know the time's going to come when I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to be ready. He's just going, Rocky IV straight, pumping iron, doing push-ups, just everything. He's just getting in the best physical shape. And you got this guy, he's like, I don't know, his 60s or 70s, just getting completely ripped. And he's like, wow, Iroh's serious now. And I remember just thinking that they'd cut to him whenever he was out there after, I think it was after Mako died, rest in peace. A great voice actor there. And Greg Baldwin took over, who did a very good job as well. Just that around that time they cut back to find out what he's doing. He's still training. Like, yep, he's getting ready. He knows what's coming. The final clash of evil there. It's really awesome. Actually, another one of my favorite characters is honestly my favorite villain in the series, and that was Azula, Zuko's sister, who basically fully embraces her reputation in the Fire Nation, going after Aang, trying to take over. She basically, spoilers, takes over the whole Earth Kingdom by fooling Clancy Brown, which is tough to do always, fooling Lex Luthor. But I just loved how evil she was and how much she loved it and how snobby she was. But once again, she didn't really become too much of a one-dimensional or two-dimensional character. I feel like she was very fleshed out, and you saw why she became that way. Once again, because of her father's influence, her culture's influence, and her jealousy of her brother, and also her own insecurities. Unfortunately, she, went to the dark side, turned evil, and gave into her lesser nature. But, I really like Azula. I think she's cool, and, probably some of the best voice acting from her, and just a really fantastic villain. And we'll get to my final thoughts about her when I talk about the conclusion of the series, which is, just overall great. I also really liked some of her friends. Mai and Ty Lee are both pretty awesome for, kind of opposite reasons. I mean, Mai Mai's a bit more, you know, kind of angsty once again, quiet, you know, a little more pessimistic and cynical in her tone. But I think she's pretty cool. She's Zuko's girlfriend. You got Ty Lee, who's the acrobat who's really spunky to compliment her. She's kind of funny too. And then, of course, you've got Fire Lord Ozai, who is voiced by the great Mark Hamill. And he's a good villain. He's a really intimidating, scary villain. They kind of keep him in the background, build up to him throughout the whole series, but really powerful, a really awesome design for him. Really, really different performance for Hamill because it was kind of quieter and more sinister than something like the Joker, which is more over the top, but you know, and a little bit deeper too. Just this really, really evil presence. Unfortunately, far less developed than Azula, but he's more of that main villain in the background, just kind of keep things going. But you definitely get the impression early on that he's going to be a serious, serious threat. I guess I'll talk about my favorite episodes. I'll just go with my least favorite and favorite for now because I'm planning to go more in depth with this at some point. But my least favorite episode of the series, it's kind of funny, it's actually the first episode I ever saw, and that would be the one where they're crossing the desert with those two tribes that hate each other, which in retrospect is not a terrible episode, but it's a very mediocre bleh episode in comparison to pretty much everything else the series had to offer. You know, and it's funny that according to fans, this is like one of the worst, if not the worst. And it's the first one I ever saw, which definitely wasn't enough to get me interested, which is unfortunate. But yeah, to this day, thinking about it, it's probably the least impressive episode. Not really horrible, in all honesty, but it's just not that great. I didn't like the one with the swamp people that much either. My favorite episode of the series, there's actually, honestly, a bunch of them I could say, but the one that always stands out to me is the one that kind of reminds me a lot of the Yoda Empire Strikes Back stuff with Luke Skywalker, because it's a very similar element, where Aang goes out and meets the Guru to basically get this huge step in his training and learning about the different chakras and the levels of the universe and maintaining a certain level of spiritual enlightenment and transcending, clearing his mind, letting go and separating himself from those connections. But he is unable to complete the training because he is drawn into his fear about what's going to happen to his friends. So there's all that tension leading up to there. But in addition to that, I think that some of the conversation between him and the Guru is really enlightening and some really, really sophisticated stuff for family television. And I always really thought that sort of spiritual and metaphysical thinking is very interesting and much aligned with my way of thinking too. But I think there's a lot people can benefit from it. Just a very cool, well-written episode, though it's just one of many great ones, and that's the best one I can think of now. My initial feelings about the series is it just generally gets better as it goes along. It really does. On that note also, I really like the one where Sokka becomes a sword fighter. Was pretty great too. But the only real negative thing about the series that I found, upon thinking about it, and I don't know if I'm in the minority with this, the conclusion to the series is very good. It's very good. But I did feel a little bit underwhelmed by the final battle between Aang and the Fire Lord. Mostly because the Fire Lord was built up to be this big threat, which he was, but the battle was fairly short, and then there was, you know, the whole final twist with his new form of bending at the end there, which I felt kind of cut things too short once again. Plus the fact that we never really got to know the Fire Lord as well as we could have. I would have liked to have known a little more about him instead of him just kind of showing up, you know, being the big bad villain and then getting taken down fairly easily. There was some tension, especially in the beginning, but I felt that it was cut out a bit too soon. But the reason why I don't have too many big problems with that is because it still serves the conclusion of the story. And really, the other subtextual battle, which I think has a lot more weight to it, is the battle between Zuko and Azula, in which you finally take them down. And that conflict just had a lot more behind it on a personal level, as well as the stakes. And I like the fact they kept switching back between the two battles, which I think was just, better animated. The voice acting was great there. The dialogue exchanged between them. Just so much personal stuff that's finally solidified and basically ends with that. Because, once again, Azula is a much more fleshed out character. We understand the relationships. So it has a lot more of a conclusion there. It's just much more solid. Yeah, that's pretty much all I really have to say about it. I mean, like I said, Avatar is really one of my favorite shows. Definitely one of my favorite animated series. If I had to give it a letter grade, I mean, literally, that thing about the Fire Lord is more of a nitpick than anything. It's easily like an A or an A+ series. It's really fantastic. there's not too much negative about it. You know, really, it's a very, very good show. You know, and in terms of Legend of Korra, I haven't actually watched any of it. I've heard very mixed things. Some people love it, some people hate it. There's not too many in between. So I've always been kind of cautious about going into it, but since it was requested, I'm planning to get to it at some point. I'd like to tackle that, at least give my thoughts about it, maybe even a first impressions or something. Yeah, it's just a really great show, and if you guys haven't seen it, I hope I didn't spoil too much for you, but if you haven't seen it for some reason, seriously, I can recommend this to pretty much anybody, any age, any demographic, especially if you have a family. You know, it's definitely something that parents and kids could watch together. There's something for everybody. It's a fantastic show that explores a lot of great stuff. I really can't oversell it. It's just a great, great series. And yeah, unfortunately, there's not too much to complain about with it. I would like to go much more in depth with some serious analysis of it, but I haven't really watched it in a while, and I feel like I would be able to give a much better review of it if I went back and watched it and breaking it down by episodes or at least by story arcs, maybe doing some character analysis. So if you guys want to see that, let me know. If you can, direct to the Patreon there for specific points you want to go into. I'm planning to tackle it anyway, but if there's anything you want to do, let me know there. I believe the next episode I'll be focusing on will be a Blade Runner analysis, so look forward to that. And we're coming up pretty much close to the end of the year here, so I'm going to be putting my new plans in order with focusing on episode reviews of series I want to do. So I'll be taking preference onto my own projects to let you guys know, and I updated that on the website if you want to check that out. So talking about some of the different series and films and whatnot I'll be discussing. Also going forward with the Fantasy Chronicles, going to be breaking down movies, TV, books that are fantasy related, as well as tackling other topics in film, and also giving you guys a heads up on some anime series and television I'll be looking into. And as far as your other requests, I'm going to try to get to them as I can, but it might be pushed off a little bit based on my other projects. But if you want to make a donation through Patreon, I can definitely get it up to the top of the list, and depending on the amount of your contribution, it'll be giving a further, longer, more in-depth treatment. So once again, any support you guys can give me can be great. Let's look forward to ending the year and starting the next one. Hopefully I'll get some more videos out to you before the end of the year, which at this rate, it looks like I probably will. Alright everybody, like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you think about the Avatar: The Last Airbender below, and thoughts about Korra. Alright, check out the Phantom Group and Film Fanatics. Stay magical.